This scary story took place at a coastal village, a place that was covered with thick fog for a whole year. That day, Mr. Su's family held a party to celebrate his grandson's 10th birthday. The whole family gathered around singing birthday songs to the kid. The kid then made a wish and blew the candles on the cake. He cut the cake into pieces and left the best one for his grandfather. He placed the cake on a white plate and gave it to Mr. Su with both hands. Since the kid had drunk a lot of soda, he told everyone that he went to the restroom to urinate. As he was about to rush out of the house and ran straight to the restroom, he suddenly froze by the scene outside. The pitch black night in the countryside together with the freezing fog terrified him as soon as he opened the door. He went back inside and spoke in a plaintive voice. His face turned pale as he tried to hold his pee. Later he had to tell his dad to accompany him to the toilet. The dad comforted his son as he led him to the restroom, saying a boy must be brave and courageous in order to do big things in life. The kid replied that he saw a figure outside gazing inside the house, which made him scared. The father was under the impression that there must be someone stalking or perhaps just a neighbor coming over to his house. But when he looked outside, there was no one there. He told his son to go inside the toilet room, while he waited outside and had a cigarette to keep himself warm. Suddenly a strange noise startled him. He turned his head and looked in the direction of the noise, then saw a figure which appeared to be of a woman. Feeling doubtful, as he wasn't sure whether that was a woman or a ghost, he yelled, "Who's that?" The grotesque shadow was there right at the door. Due to the thick fog, he couldn't make out who it was. Feeling annoyed, he yelled loudly, "Who are you?" The shadow disappeared instantly, leaving him gaping with astonishment. The man reflexively rushed outside to check, but there was nobody in sight, which terrified him even more. As the man had no idea what was happening, his son walked out of the restroom in a weird posture. He looked strangely like someone who had lost his soul. He looked down while heading back to the house. Hair covered half of his face. What was worth noticing here was, his crotch was soaked as if he had peed in his pants. Seeing the bizarre behavior of his son, the father called his name loudly, but the kid didn't reply as he went straight to the house. When he got inside, his face looked horrifying, one of his eyes wide open while the other one narrowed. His mother was scared to see one of her child's eyes being injured. She yelled loudly, but the kid just fixed his gaze on the food on the table. He rushed to the table like a starving tiger. He grabbed the food, then greedily devoured it like a hungry ghost in the presence of the whole family. Never in his life had he eaten this much, hence everyone feeling worried about him. Mr. Su placed his hand on his grandson's shoulder. He asked, "My grandson, are you okay? Don't eat like that or you will choke." All of a sudden the kid started trembling, then reached to a fork on the table and stabbed to behind. The sharp fork went straight to the man's eye, which made him fall backwards. Blood was spilling everywhere. The scene was now extremely frightening. Everyone rushed to Mr. Su as he screamed in horror. Mr. Su's son instantly took him to the hospital. As they were a few steps out of the house, the child giggled hysterically. His mother looked at him in a scared manner. The kid suddenly acted in such a spooky way, as if he had been possessed by a demon. He watched his grandfather while laughing delightfully. The next morning, Mr. Su returned home from the hospital. According to the doctor, his injured eye had been blind permanently. The grandfather sat in the living room. His grandchild had been locked in a room by his parents. He smashed things and screamed loudly. He was no longer a 10-year-old normal kid. Now he looked like a ferocious, bloodthirsty demon. The parents sighed deeply. They didn't know what had happened to their child. After thinking for a while, Mr. Su told them that the kid had been possessed. The man was amazed by his father's remark. Mr. Su told him to set out tomorrow. They had to ask the exorcist to remove the evil spirit out of the child. Everyone was sleepless at night. The couple was in great pain as their son had to deal with such an awful incident. The woman sobbed. She was hurt to find out the villagers had circulated rumors that her child was mentally unstable. The husband reassured his wife, but the woman couldn't stop crying. She spoke with her tear-filled eyes, feeling scared that the child would not make it and hence lost his mind and lived as a psycho for the rest of his life. The next morning, the villagers gathered at Mr. Sue's house to witness the exorcism. Some said the kid had lost his mind, while others said that he had been possessed by an evil or developed mental illness. An altar was placed in the middle of the yard. The husband and the wife tied up his child, then put him on a chair. The kid became furious as soon as he saw the exorcist. His eyes were filled with anger as if he wanted to eat her alive. The exorcist grabbed the rooster by its neck, then slashed its throat with a knife. She let its blood drip into a bowl while muttering some spells under her breath. The exorcist picked up the bowl, then drank the blood but didn't swallow it. Instead, she kept it in her mouth, then slowly approached the kid. The closer she approached him, the more violently he shook. The exorcist spit out the blood in her mouth to the kid's face. Then she took out from her bag a yellow stick that was made of animal's fur and performed a ritual dance around the kid. The kid screamed his head off, saying that he would take revenge on the woman. All of a sudden his eyes grew wider as if they wanted to pop out. One of them turned black and there was a wisp of black smoke coming out from it. Then the child sat unmoving with his face down. The mother rushed to her child. She called his name and awoke him. A few minutes later the kid opened his eyes. Thinking their child had returned to normal, the couple was delighted as the woman hugged the child in her arms. She bursted out crying. They untied him and expressed their gratitude to the exorcist. But the woman didn't say anything. Sensing something wasn't right, Mr. Sue came to the exorcist and asked if she was okay. No sooner had he come to her than the woman let out a scream. She bit her lips painfully. Unexpectedly, the exorcist picked up her stick, then stabbed it right into one of her eyes. The scene was so disturbing that it shocked everyone present there. The family members were dumbfounded as the woman collapsed on the ground and died laying in the middle of the yard. Amidst the crowd appeared a beggar who screamed loudly as he saw the incident. His face turned pale instantly. The beggar pushed his way out of the crowd while continuously screaming. Since that day, Mr. Sue had been bedridden, fearing that he would not overcome his illness. He told a secret that he'd been hiding to his son and his daughter-in-law. As he recalled his memories, he told the couple about a murderer that he, the female exorcist, and the beggar were involved in. The couple couldn't hide their amazement on their faces when their father said he had something to do with a bizarre incident going on with the family. Mr. Sue felt painful. He bursted into tears and then told everything to them. Back when he was young, he and the beggar had sworn brothers. One day, after taking a few shots, the two felt slightly drunk. They went to an alley and smoked some cigarettes. As they saw a woman walking by, the two intended to rape her. The beautiful woman had just turned 18 at that moment. The beggar was the one approaching her first as he blocked her way. The two men found it amusing to see the young woman being scared, and they constantly teased her. One of the men rushed to her and grabbed her arms. The woman tried to defend herself but failed as the man was too strong for her. He dragged her away. The two took her to a nearby warehouse. The beggar intended to rape her, but the young woman reacted violently. She scratched his face, which hurt him badly. The pain arose the ferocity within him as he slapped the girl hard in the face and pushed her head backwards. Little did he know that there were sharp wooden sticks behind her. They stabbed her in the eyes and the back of his head, which killed her instantly. The two buried her body at a deserted spot in the village. Since that day, the beggar always saw the woman in his dreams taking revenge on him, which made him scared, terribly scared. The beggar then asked the female exorcist to help him. The woman then used her magic to capture the young girl's spirit. She casted a spell, then put a charm into the large box and placed it onto the girl's corpse, then covered it with dirt. Mr. Sue spoke in a sobbing voice. There was great regret on his face. He later died after he finished telling the story, his eyes wide open. A few days later, the villagers also found the corpse of the beggar in a lake, with a stick stabbed into one of his eyes, looking horrifying. It turned out that the young girl's grave had been digged open by the animals in the forest, hence her spirit had invoked and took revenge on those who harmed her. This creepy story had been told by the villagers for many years. It is believed that the thick fog surrounding the village was created by the female ghost. This story is about a newly married couple. To Aki, Jen was the most wonderful woman he had ever met, and to Jen, Aki was her last hope for a true love. Jen used to deal with depression for a long time. She had a traumatic childhood as her father constantly beat her. The man had destroyed her emotions ever since. Gradually she no longer had faith in love, but since the moment she met Aki, everything had changed. Indeed, Jen had placed her faith in the right person. The first days of their marriage, Aki was so in love with her as he took great care of his wife and comforted her a lot. There were days when Jen was sickened. There were days where Jen was sick. He even took days off his work to look after her. Despite having to go to work all week long, every Sunday Aki always spent his time taking his wife to the park for some fresh air, as it would be healthy for her. But the thoughts of having to earn enough money to pay for the two's basic needs had put a lot of pressure on him. Aki had to pay every expense in the house, from the electricity bills to the rent. With the salary of a normal employee like him, he found it truly difficult to deal with. Aki decided to set out to work for a big company in the city in the hopes of getting a career development. As the new job demanded more of his time, the man rarely had a chance to see his wife at home. The first days being away from Jen had been so difficult to Aki as he missed her terribly. But he tried to deal with it and kept working for a better life for the two. All the stress and pressure he had at work were all kept to himself, as he didn't want his wife to worry about him. But gradually, months of negatively pent-up emotion had caused changes in his behavior. Every time his wife called him, he merely responded that he was extremely busy, so he couldn't go back home and see her. The intensive, grueling work, together with his wife constantly demanding to see him, made him wary. Knowing her husband had to work far away from home more than anyone, she was longing for her husband to come home, since it had been over 3 months going by, yet she still hadn't had a chance to see him. Jen assumed her husband had found himself another woman and left her. Aki was annoyed every time Jen tried to ask him about his loyalty to her. He didn't want to see her acting jealous like that. Indeed, Aki had been heavily focusing on his work. He worked tirelessly, days and nights, just to make sure his family lived a full and happy life. That night, as usual, Jen called him on the phone. But there was something strange in her voice, as she normally replied to her husband in a cheerful manner. But this time, she was dangerously quiet. Aki had also sensed something odd was happening. The next morning, as Aki was doing his job, one of his colleagues told him that there was a call from a woman who introduced herself as Aki's wife. But somehow she hung up quickly without leaving any message. Aki felt insecure, yet he still remained calm. He went to the balcony for some fresh air, trying to connect the dots. Actually, he really wanted to return home to his wife, but the fear of being berated for leaving his work had prevented him from doing it. Right that moment, from behind, the director patted him on the shoulder and said, "You could take a few days off to return home and check on your wife if you want to." It turned out that the director had been told about Aki's situation, so perhaps it was the reason why he wanted to give Aki some days off to return home to his wife. But it wasn't exactly like that. The director told Aki that his wife had called him and asked to see her husband for the last time. Aki immediately felt worried as soon as he found out about it. Why did she act like that? Was there anything bad happening to her? As the director left, he quickly made a phone call to Jen to check on her. Someone picked up the phone. But there was just a dead silence at the other end of the line. Unable to wait any longer, Aki spoke something, yet there was no reply from Jen. The utter silence irritated Aki, as he thought his wife was being mad at him, so she didn't say anything. Feeling angry, he scolded Jen badly and said hurtful things to her. But there was still no reply from her. Aki was sure someone was definitely holding the phone since he had heard some minor noises, but the reason why Jen didn't answer was unbeknownst to him. A while later, as Aki had calmed down, he told his wife that he was going to take a few days off and return home. The man announced it to her without knowing whether she could hear him or not. As Aki was about to hang up, Jen suddenly spoke to him in a cold, strange voice that startled him. In a muttering voice she said she was always waiting for him and would prepare a special dish for him as soon as he got home. A statement that supposedly to be normal, yet it stuck in his mind for a while. On the way home he couldn't stop thinking about it. After 2 hours being on the road, he finally made it home. With a cheerful expression on his face, he opened the door and got inside. But his wife didn't show up to welcome him home with a warm hug. Anyway, Aki wasn't bothered much thinking about it. He searched for his wife everywhere in the house, and then saw her in the kitchen with a bowl of hot soup. But she didn't say anything as she was looking down. Aki thought that maybe his wife was still mad at him, so he didn't scold her at all, just gladly sat at the table and enjoyed the soup. But there was another thing that made him felt strange. The soup had the pleasantly appetizing aroma. Seeing the expression on Aki's face, one could easily tell how delicious the dish was. But contrary to its wonderfully pungent aroma, the soup was extremely hard to eat. It even had an unpleasant fishy smell. Aki immediately sensed something odd with the soup. After a moment of thinking, he asked Jen what the soup was made of, but Jen didn't say anything. Having no other choice, Aki had to bring the bowl inside. And by the way, checked what was inside the pot that made his soup tasted horrible. As Aki removed the lid, his face suddenly became darkened. He was completely terrified to see the scene before his eyes. How unbelievable it was. Inside the pot was a human hand. But whose hand was this? And how could Jen do such a horrifying thing? Aki was panicking, but he still tried to remain calm to take in the situation. Next, he smelled a stench coming from a corner of the kitchen. Looking over, Aki saw a body of a woman laying on the floor. As he approached the body, he realized it was his beloved wife. Seeing her laying on the ground and moving, he felt an immense pain in his heart. He constantly held her name, but it was too late. There was a jar of sleeping pills beside her. It looked like she had taken them to commit suicide. But even more horrifying was one of the arms was gone. At this point, Aki realized it was all his faults that caused the death of his wife. During his time being away from home, Jen had fallen into depression again, and there was a strong likelihood that she had cut off one of her arms and cooked it for her husband. But who was sitting at the table? Jen's body was here, but the girl sitting there was still neither moving nor saying anything, while a heavy atmosphere quickly was taking over the room. The death of his wife, together with the appearance of this mysterious woman, made Aki panicked. His face got darkened, sweat was dripping as he fearfully crawled backwards. He took out his phone, intended to call an ambulance, but as no one had picked up the phone, Aki suddenly felt dizzy and fainted on the ground. As he woke up, he found himself in a hospital and was surrounded by many of his colleagues. They all looked worried for him. When Aki completely regained his consciousness, one of his co-workers broke the news to him, saying Jen had died and the soup was actually made from one of the arms. Aki couldn't hold in his emotions anymore. He didn't expect that his carelessness would cause his beloved wife to suffer from depression again and die such a tragic death. The co-worker pitied the young couple having to deal with such a tragic incident. He confronted Aki and encouraged them to keep on living. He even revealed to Aki that after researching their house, they had found a letter from Jen to Aki. It turned out that Jen was under the impression that her husband had found another woman and no longer loved her. In the suicide note, Jen said that she would still love him deeply, no matter how he treated her. Perhaps it was the main reason that made Jen cut off one of her arms after taking the pills and cooked it as a last meal for Aki. After the death of his wife, Aki had become a madman. The guilt within him had turned him into a psycho, days and nights wandering, begging on the streets. This story is about a man named Kim. As most of his childhood had been pampered by his parents, the man was very lazy. As time went by, it was until his mother became old and no longer had physical ability to work. Together with the scolding of his older siblings, the man decided to go out looking for a job. But Kim had no idea where he was heading to. He didn't even know what job would be suitable for him either. Luckily, he encountered a construction site on the way and assumed there would be a job for him. As Kim walked in the place, he met a worker with a cigarette in his mouth, looking bossy. Kim asked the man if he knew any job that was cushy enough for him to take. The man suggested him taking the job he was doing. He told Kim that he just needed to stay at the construction site, guarding it for a time period of 6 months. Kim agreed to take the job, and today was also his first day at work. After he was given the job, he followed the man to take a look around the site, then went to his row houses to stay. It was old row houses. Seemed like they had been built a long time ago, but strangely as he arrived there, he saw nobody. There were just utter silence and pitch black darkness. But Kim didn't care much about it. As for him, having an easy job like this had already been an achievement to him, so the man didn't ask for anything else. After a long day of working, he felt exhausted, and it was weary to think of going out finding something to eat, so he chose to order food online. 15 minutes later, the food was delivered to him. Life being away from mom was amazing, the man thought to himself. He could sleep throughout the day, and with a phone that had access to Wi-Fi, he could order any kind of food he wanted to. After he finished his meal, he didn't even bother to clean up the mess as he left it there, and went outside to check the construction site. 20 minutes later, Kim returned to his shelter and went to bed. The man had fallen asleep as soon as he closed his eyes. But when it came to midnight, Kim suddenly had a feeling of heaviness all over his body. Even though he changed his sleeping position multiple times, he still found it uncomfortable to go back to sleep. He also felt cold and his body was drenched with sweat. At first, Kim tried to close his eyes tightly so he could get back to sleep, but failed to do it as he felt like there was someone behind him, while there was rustling to be heard. Feeling unable to put up with the bizarreness going on, Kim got up. He looked around, yet found no one in the room but him. Observing for a while, suddenly he stopped his gaze at the table. He didn't know why he did it, but he had a bad premonition. He tried to assure himself that there was nothing odd happening. It was just his imagination, and then went back to sleep. The next morning, Kim woke up to tiredness as he didn't have a good sleep the night before. He got out of bed with his eyes barely open. But as Kim walked past the table next to his bed, he suddenly widened his eyes, mouth agape in amazement. Looked like he had seen something surprising. Turned out that what he saw was the empty food containers on the table. If he recalled correctly, they were leftovers from last night, but somehow they all disappeared. The chicken pieces and the bowl of soup had been eaten. The doors had been locked before he went to sleep, so there wouldn't be any chance that cats or dogs could break into the room, even the smaller ones. Kim was really curious about the mysterious disappearance of the leftovers, and for that reason he intended to bring more food with him and leave some leftovers for the night, as he wanted to find out who had eaten the food that night. This time he brought more food to the room, and only ate sparingly. The man was under the impression these leftovers would lure the ones who dared to steal his food that night. Kim intended to stay up all night to catch the culprits, but he was soundly asleep before the clock struck midnight. But just like the previous night, as soon as the clock said 12 o'clock, Kim once again had a feeling of heaviness all over his body, as if there was someone laying on him, which made him feel uncomfortable. The rustling together with the old gusts of wind awoke Kim. He again had a bad premonition, but this time he didn't quickly sit up. Instead, he slightly opened his eyes and turned his gaze onto the table. Kim took a deep breath to reassure himself, then slowly opened his eyes. His face suddenly changed color. Now it wasn't just the amazement he expressed when he found out about the incident this morning, but it was a terrifying expression on his face. There were flickering white shadows gathering around the table where he placed his food. Ghosts were standing around the table, picking up food with their bare hands and devouring it. The ghosts looked like they had been left starving for years. The white shadows with lifeless eyes had easily freaked out anyone. Despite panicking, Kim still came up with a way to chase the ghosts away, as he reached out to the switch and turned the lights on. Indeed, the ghosts disappeared as soon as he turned the lights on. Kim couldn't believe his eyes, or what he had just seen. To confirm what he'd been thinking was true, he plucked up his courage and walked to the table. Indeed, the food had disappeared. There were just empty plates left on it. Without a doubt, it was the ghosts that had eaten the leftovers, but this affirmation made Kim really scared. The man had a habit of leaving leftovers since he was a young kid, but this was his first time dealing with such a thing. Kim couldn't understand why this horrifying incident had happened to him. Was it him, or was this place haunted with voracious ghosts? But to reassure himself, Kim tried to come up with another answer for the problem he was dealing with, as he assumed he might have had hallucinations. Kim got back to his bed, tightly closed his eyes and waited for the sun to rise. The next morning, to clear his mind, Kim set out to town and went to a market. The noisy atmosphere at the market would help him forget about the fears he had last night. As Kim was walking around, he saw some fortune tellers. Recalling the incident last night, he approached them. A fortune teller looked at him and said, "Are there ghosts in your house? You look very anxious." Surprised by how quickly the man could find out about his problem, Kim told him everything about the bizarre incident and asked for his help. The man's face became darkened as he listened to the story. According to him, the construction site was once a mass grave, and most of them were left abandoned. The apartment building was built right on the mass grave. As a result, this place was often seen with starving ghosts at night, but they didn't harm anyone. However, Kim still asked the man to help him as he was scared. The fortune teller gave him a talisman, saying it would keep the ghosts away as long as it was placed at the front of the door. He even told Kim not to leave leftovers. Having received the talisman, Kim gave the man some money, then quickly left. With the talisman in his hand, Kim was bewildered, not knowing what to do. Even though he was scared of the ghosts, part of him still wanted to help them since they were pitiful and harmless to people. It took Kim a while to finally make a decision on whether to hang the talisman at the front of the door or not. If he did it, the ghost wouldn't be able to enter his room, but he didn't have the will to do it. Being hesitant for a while, Kim decided to throw the talisman away, as he believed the ghosts would never try to harm him. Since that day, somehow he was no longer bothered by the ghosts. Actually, he had placed a table outside the room and put some of his food onto it. The food was there for the pitiful ghosts to eat. From being a man with lazy, uncaring attitude, Kim had turned over a new leaf and became a better person. This is a true scary story that once happened to me. That day, to celebrate the successful undertaking of the new construction entity in town, I asked my twin brother to have some beers with me. Actually, it was this guy that helped me easily undertake the construction for the main bridge in town. Back in days, I went to the city to receive construction education while he stayed at his hometown, working as a manager. As we were drinking, we recalled our past memories. We had always been close together when we were kids. My brother asked me about our parents, as he hadn't seen them for a while. I reassured him that they were still fine and missed him terribly, and they would come visit him soon. We spent the whole afternoon drinking, talking till it was getting dark. As we had gotten a bit wasted, we decided to leave for home. My brother suggested walking to his house, as it would be a great way to sober up fast, and also we could do some sightseeing on the way. Since the construction area was near to his house, I agree with his idea, as I always wanted to take a walk around there. So we staggered all the way home, arm in arm. I didn't know if it was the childhood memories that became so vivid to me at that time. I suddenly told my brother to bathe in the river with me. It was this river that me and my brother usually went to take a bath in back in the days. Together, we walked down the riverside. The soft green grass appeared so poetically beautiful under the moonlight. Old habits die hard. We took off our clothes soon as we got to the river, just like the days when we were kids. We swam rapidly in the water. The atmosphere in the place was still the same. Nothing had changed since the day I left for the city. After swimming for a while, we continued to soak in the water. All of a sudden, the water became colder, which seemed bizarre to me. I asked my brother about it, but was quickly reassured that it was just a normal phenomenon. As I was listening to him, I was startled by something before my eyes. In a moment, I saw a kid appearing behind my brother in a scary manner. He let out a smile that was widened to his ears. His eyes were dead white, and the face was strangely pale, looking lifelessly. I rubbed my eyes, tried to regain my composure while assuring myself that it was just an hallucination. Seeing me acting bizarre, my brother asked me if I was okay. I said I saw something behind him, but at that moment the water surface was still, and there was nothing out of the ordinary taking place. As the water became colder and colder, I rushed my brother to swim ashore quickly. As soon as I finished my sentence, I was startled when something freezingly cold touched my legs. The feeling was so realistic, despite being pretty nervous. I didn't want to say it to my brother, as he wouldn't believe me either. My premonition told me to get ashore as soon as possible. Seeing the anxious look on my face, my brother agreed to swim ashore as he worried I would catch a cold. As we were on our way towards land, something suddenly grabbed me and pulled me down. I let out a terrified scream which instantly caught my brother's attention. Now, as I was sinking into the cold water, only my hands were seen above the surface as I waved for help. Right that moment, my brother came to my rescue just in time. However, there was a mysterious force trying to pull me down again. It was considerably greater than that of a human. Eventually, my brother succeeded in his attempt to save me from death. He grabbed me tightly with one of his arms, then used all his strength to make it ashore. As we made it onto land, he let me lay on the grass while performing CPR on me. After resuscitation, I slowly regained my conscience. My brother helped me up, then asked me what had happened. I told him there was something trying to pull me down to the bottom, but I didn't have any idea what it was. I told him that it must be something spooky, which I assumed was the ghost I'd previously seen standing behind him, that caused the incident. I pointed at the bruise near my ankle. There was still a black mark that had a shape of a human hand left on it. How terrifyingly clear the mark looked. Now, as I had recalled everything, I remembered looking down as I was being pulled down, and saw something that would surely haunt me for the rest of my life. That creepy creatures looked at me and let out a demonic smile. It looked like a child's corpse. He grabbed my legs tightly and stared into my soul as if he wanted to eat me alive. But what was even more scarier was that the child looked quite familiar to me. We were terrified by what had just happened, but none of us had any explanation for the creature to appear and try to kill me that night. Later I returned to my city. One day, as I was enjoying a sauna, something grabbed my legs and pulled strongly, which made me startle. As things happened so unexpectedly, I couldn't do anything but to let out a scream. As I was dragged into the pool, I once again saw the demonic smile of that creepy creature I encountered at the river that night. It somehow had followed me here and tried to drown me again. Despite being pulled down, I was still aware of people nearby rushing to help me. It took them a while to hold my hands and drag me out of the pool. Everyone was astounded. They had no idea how I got myself in such a situation, as it would be out of the ordinary for someone to have a pool accident in this steam room since the water was shallow. Suddenly I had a strange feeling as I sensed something familiar to me presented here. It was him, my twin brother. He was standing next to me. How spooky that was. I remembered being saved by 3 people, but now only 2 of them were here to be seen. Was it true that the other guy was my twin brother? What the heck was happening here? Why did that ghost keep following me? Since that day, I didn't dare to go into the water again, as I was in fear of being assaulted by the ghost. It was him, my twin brother who I'd lost in that river 20 years ago. I could have saved him on that fated day, but instead, I let him die in that cold river bottom. This is a scary story that I was told by my grandfather. Back in the days we worked as farmers, and after every rice harvest there were haystacks being placed in the front yard. These piles of hay had different uses. They could be used for feeding calves, building roofs, or making fire. The haystacks were also used as the playthings for kids in the village, as they climbed up and down all day without being bored. The women were usually seen sitting next to the piles, chatting, knitting, etc. It was safe to say that those haystacks were etched on the village's memory. During that time there was a pile of hay that was believed to be haunted by ghosts. It was placed near the forest and everyone avoided walking near to it at night. One day a young man had to work outside in the afternoon and return home late at night. Despite knowing it was dangerous to encounter the haystack at this specific time, he had no other choice as it was the only path that led to his home. It was only him walking on the path. He thought of the scary stories of the villagers and felt a shiver run down his spine, but still believed nothing bad would happen to him as he wasn't a squeamish guy. But what happened next was completely out of his expectation. It was on that night he'd witnessed something truly horrific. The man screamed loudly as he looked at the haystack. His face turned pale, he panicked and trembled uncontrollably. As the villagers took him home, the man was still scared and trembling. He covered himself with a blanket. No one knew what made him behave like that. He tremblingly covered his face with his hands and then muttered something under his breath. Sometimes people heard him say words like "ghost" or "eyeless." A while later, another scary incident took place. One day the man's son suddenly became stubborn and cried a lot, which was very out of character, but the man seemingly not to be bothered about it as he kept on watching TV and ignoring him. His wife was very upset to see him behaving so irresponsibly. She angrily asked him why he didn't calm their child and played with him. The man was irritated. He said, "There's no need to calm him down. He'll stop crying anyway." What the man said was unacceptable to his wife. She vented her frustration on him and scolded him badly. For the past 2 months, the man had always been lying at home and refusing to find a job, even though they were running out of money. Despised by his wife, the man spoke loudly. "Why don't you just go out there and look for a job on your own? Stop acting like you know everything when you don't." The woman was triggered by her husband's remarks. For the past 2 months, it was her who took care of the family and fed everyone. The man now became even more furious. In a moment of anger, he told his wife to take their child and go back to her mama's house, living a happy life, as he was no longer financially capable of nursing them. The woman didn't expect that one day she would be humiliated like this. She packed her clothes and left the house with the child. The man now regretted for what he had said to her. He knew it was late, and going out at this time would be dangerous, but he didn't want to lower his ego for them. So he intended to pick them up the next morning, as he wanted to give his wife time to cool down her anger. Moreover, it had been quite long for her to visit her parents, so this could be an opportunity for a family reunion. The woman also regretted having been too harsh with her husband, which was also way too out of character for her. Besides, it was a terrible idea to go out this late. As they walked to the path on which the spooky haystack was placed, her child trembled uncontrollably. He grabbed her shirt, feeling scared and wanted to go home. But similar to her husband, the woman didn't want to deflate her ego. She reassured her son that he didn't have to be scared, as she was here with him. As they kept walking, they had a feeling of someone stalking them. As the child expressed his anxiety to her, she knew there was definitely someone following them. When they got closer to the haystack, the child started trembling more violently. He held his mom's hands tightly. The woman felt extremely anxious. Her forehead was dripping with cold sweat. The haystack now looked creepier than it normally was. In the sky, the moon was covered by layers of clouds. Only a shaft of moonlight shone down the path. The freakish coldness soon prevailed the village. As her anxiety became greater, she heard the sound of light footsteps behind her. She turned around to check if there was anyone, but the pitch darkness together with the empty space made her become more terrified. Suddenly, the kid held out, which startled her. He pointed out at someone in front of her who was standing next to the haystack. It was sheer luck to know that there were still people being here with her this late. The woman felt less scared now as she gave a sigh of relief. There were 2 people to be seen at the spot. One wore a blue shirt and the other wore a red one. They appeared to be a boy and a girl. Since they were standing in the darkness, she couldn't make them out clearly. The 2 were facing their backs at the woman and her child. She called them, but none of them reacted. Thinking they didn't hear her voice, she walked closer to them. The woman could tell by the 2's appearance that they were 2 kids who were around 10 years old, as she asked them why they were out here this late. The 2 still ignored her question despite her being very close to them. The woman then patted on the blue shirt kid's shoulder, whom she believed to be the older one. Instantly the kids turned around and stared at her, but their faces didn't look like those of normal human beings, as only bones and teeth were there to be seen. There was no flesh on their faces. Their eye sockets were empty and completely black, which gave her an impression that they were staring into her soul. Feeling shocked and panicked, she let out a fierce scream and fell backwards. As her head hit the ground, she fainted while her son was crying out loud, helplessly watching his mom being in danger. After the incident, the woman's health declined as she was still haunted by the horrific scene. After having a checkup, the woman was told by the doctor that she was suffering from a psychological disorder which was caused by depression and pressure. But as soon as the doctor finished his sentence, the woman sat up and constantly yelled, "Ghosts! Ghosts! There are ghosts!" in an extremely horrified manner. The husband quickly hugged his wife so she wouldn't jump off her bed. He comforted her, then asked her what had happened, but the woman just kept repeating the word eyeless. Both the husband and the doctor were in utter bewilderment. They couldn't figure out what had caused the woman to be so scared. As the man knew he couldn't get any information from his wife, he turned his attention to his son. The child was still fearfully trembling, eyes filled with tears. He bursted out crying loudly as his father asked him about the incident. He told his dad everything, from the moment they walked near the haystack to when they saw the ghosts, and how his mom fainted. But before the child could return home and inform his dad, the two ghosts had disappeared into the pile of hay. The husband and the doctor gazed at each other, sensing something bizarre. Lately they had heard rumors about the spooky haystack. A few weeks ago a person was reported to develop a mental illness after having an encounter with it. The next morning the husband went to see the village chief and inform him about the incident. Just like him, the villagers had agreed to remove the ghostly haystack at once. Some young men brought their tools to get rid of it. As they reached deeper to the bottom of the haystack, they smelled a foul stench coming out of it. When they finally removed the haystack, what was buried underneath instantly terrified them. Out of curiosity, the villagers quickly gathered around the spot. What appeared before their eyes were the corpses of two children who were at the age of 10. They were badly decomposed. Only human bones and their clothes, including the red shirt and the blue shirt, were left to be found. The police quickly arrived at the scene. Turned out that the children were from the nearby village. They had been reported missing 3 months ago. Their parents thought they had been kidnapped as they couldn't find them anywhere. But to everyone's amazement, the children were believed to hide underneath the haystack, only to suffocate and turn into ghosts wandering around this place. This story centers around a small town which was always busy and crowded. There was a very popular small dumpling restaurant in town. Pao was a regular customer of this restaurant. One day he invited 2 of his friends to go with him. The restaurant opened at 4 p.m. and closed just merely 2 hours later, so those who wanted to taste the food had to go early. The owner of the restaurant was a middle-aged man. As he recently made some changes to his recipes, the food had been selling like hot cakes. It looked like there was only one table available at the restaurant. Pao and his 2 other friends sipped their tea while waiting for their food to be served. 15 minutes later, the dumplings were finished. Pao and his friends were delighted as soon as they knew the food was ready to be served. The steamy dumplings arrived in a wooden container. The appetizing aroma made Pao and his friends drool. They quickly grabbed chopsticks and picked up the dumplings one by one, hungrily ate them whilst not forgetting to dunk the cakes into the red sauce. As part of the white dumpling was covered with sauce, Pao stuffed it in his mouth and chewed on it with a joyful expression on his face. After tasting the dumplings, one of Pao's friends expressed his utter amazement. He didn't expect the cakes to be so tasty. As the guys were enjoying their dishes, one of them suddenly chewed something very hard. Thinking his friend had accidentally chewed a grain that was left in the dumpling, Pao quickly reassured his friend not to be bothered about it. But what was worth mentioning here was that the guy in the blue shirt removed something from his mouth, and it was definitely not a grain. His face changed color as he gazed at the thing he'd just taken out from his mouth. His limbs started to tremble. He stammered, "A human nail!" How could there be a human nail inside one of the dumplings? The nail was covered in a substance that looked extremely dirty. Pao was shocked and outraged. He was furious to think that these dumplings were made in filthy conditions. The unexpected appearance of human nails inside the dumplings didn't just happen to Pao and his friends. As the nearby tables also encountered the same situation, they started calling out the restaurant owner. Pao slammed his hand on the table. He pointed at the owner and howled loudly. Seeing the outrage in his customers, the restaurant owner acted surprisingly as if he had no idea about the serious incident. He was even more surprised when Pao shoved the nail to his face. Normally he was the only one in charge of making these fillings, and there was no one else but him doing this job. But the infuriated customers wouldn't patiently listen to his explanations. As the man was still unable to speak, Pao quickly grabbed him by the collar and threw a powerful punch to the man, making both his nose and mouth bleed. The restaurant owner was badly beaten up. Moreover, he was also taken to the police station by Pao and his friends. It was already late and there were only 3 officers on duty. One sheriff named Liu Feng, together 2 of his colleagues, officers Ping and Chao. As they were about to go to the canteen, they heard noises outside. Sensing something bad had happened, the sheriff got out of his seat and went to check. No sooner had he arrived at the door than he saw Chao rushing towards him. "Sir, there are many civilians outside the gate. They want to sue the restaurant owner for leaving nails in the food." The sheriff's face changed color as soon as the situation was reported. With his acute thinking, he quickly figured out this was not a simple case. In less than 15 minutes, the sheriff, together with Chao and Ping, had taken the restaurant owner to the interrogation room. The sheriff gave a brief report on the case to the restaurant owner. It was out of the question for someone to pull out their nails and put them inside the dumplings, so the only convincing explanation for the incident was the fillings of the cakes had been made of human flesh. The restaurant owner was in tremendous shock as he listened to the officer. He seemingly had no idea about it, and he was not the one behind all of this. The sheriff ordered his 2 colleagues to go to the restaurant and examine the dumplings there. At that moment, many people had been reported on the incident. They quickly gathered in front of the restaurant. Many of them were scared to find out about the news. For a long time, the people in this town had eaten the dishes served at this restaurant. So was it true that they had eaten human flesh? However, some of them refused to believe the rumors, as they wanted to go to the scene in person and hear the final conclusion from the cops. Ping and Chao had already been in the kitchen of the restaurant as they started looking for evidence. A few seconds later, large bags of meat that was used to make the dumpling fillings had been found. As the 2 officers opened one of the bags, they were amazed to see what was inside them. The meat had been minced, so they weren't sure whether this was actually human meat or not. Hence, these bags of meat needed to be taken away and carefully examined. The officers reassured the civilians, then took one of the bags back to the station for further examination. After interrogating the restaurant owner, the police had found out about the place where he got the meat for his dumpling fillings. They quickly sent out vehicles to the destination. Inside the house was a muscular man slaughtering a pig with his butcher knife. The man acted bizarrely as soon as he saw the cops. He asked them in an annoying manner, "Why are you people here in my house?" Chao remained calm to the man's ferocious face as he got straight to the point, asking if the man was the meat supplier for the dumpling restaurant in town. As the butcher finally knew what the officer was referring to, he showed no fear. With a serious look on his eyes and a cold voice, the man confirmed he was the one, and asked what the officers wanted from him. Ping asked him what the exact type of meat he gave to the restaurant owner, and how could there be human nails in the dumplings. As soon as Ping finished his sentence, the butcher pulled out the knife from the cutting board and spoke with a cold face. "It's not your business to know what kind of meat it is. Why do I have to answer your question anyway? Get out of here, now!" As the 2 officers were still unable to react to the butcher's aggression, the man suddenly rushed to them like a madman, brandishing his knife at them. Chao showed no fear as he faced the psycho. He pushed Ping to the side while dealing with a man with a sharp knife on his own. Ping dodged the blade from the madman. and came at him after switching from defense to his attack mode. He quickly blocked the man's knife holding hand, then used all his strength to wrestle the man to the ground. His heavy body fell into the table, making it break in half. The man felt his body aching and could barely move. Moments later, the other cops had arrived to take the guy to the police station. The case had been rapidly resolved, but Chow still had a thought on his mind that the man had been keeping human bodies in his house. The cops started to survey the scene. As the butcher was taken away, he turned his head and howled that those people deserved to be killed. The officer ordered the rest of the team to quickly find the bodies. The priority now was to find where he kept his victims. The vehicle that carried the butcher made his way back to the police station. The officers who were still at the scene searched the place, but it was more difficult than they thought, as an hour had passed, yet they still found nothing relating to the man's victims. At the moment when the officers were about to leave, suddenly from behind an old lady ran to them. It looked like she wanted to say something. It turned out that she was one of the butcher's neighbors. For years she had encountered with so many bizarre things, but she didn't have the nerve to tell anyone, as she was scared she could be the next victim of the serial killer. When the man was first moving to the neighborhood, he seemed like a good man to her, as if she often saw him helping poor people, giving them shelter and feeding them. But the odd thing was that the beggars, they went into his house and somehow they were never seen again. Moreover, the old lady also added that she also usually heard people sobbing and screaming at night. One night, she plucked up her courage to pull aside the window curtains, only to witness something truly horrifying. There were lots of white shadows appearing in her view. The longer she gazed at them, the more abnormal these people seemed to her. She couldn't make out their faces no matter how hard she tried. On several occasions, she wanted to report the incident to the police, but the fear of being his next victim had prevented her from doing it. But since the man had been arrested, she believed it was the right time to tell the truth. Despite it not their first time dealing with brutal murders, the officers present shivered as they listened to the old lady. Officer Chow quickly ordered the other officers to get shovels and hose as they headed to the spot where the lady had told them. They believed there was an underground cellar where the man kept the bodies. Nearly 30 minutes later, one of the officers spoke loudly. "There's something very hard here. Come take a look." As Chow had expected, there was a secret cellar in the butcher's house. Before their eyes was an iron lid with handles on the surface. Bing plucked up his courage and then carefully grabbed the handle and removed the cover. A stench came out as soon as the officer lifted it. People at the scene had to cover their noses, their faces became darkened. Indeed, there was a secret cellar with stairs leading to it. The foul smell together with the pitch darkness inside the place didn't discourage Bing as he courageously walked down the stairs. He shone the flashlight into the dark. His face immediately changed color. What had caused him to be that terrified? Now he was no longer brave enough to keep going, his body frozen. Aside from cutting boards and the knives, there were also things that were truly shocking and beyond one's imagination. Dead bodies hung on the walls, and underneath them were baskets filled with human organs. The case had been cleared. The famous restaurant in town had used human flesh to make its products, and the butcher, it was certain that he would pay for the deadly sins he had committed. This scary story revolves around a young man named Lu, who had just graduated from college and was still unemployed. The man was also a game addict, as he spent most of his days playing video games. One day he played video games until midnight. It was until he got defeated in the game he was playing that he realized he hadn't had his dinner. Lu had gradually made a habit of having dinner late at night, 12 o'clock at midnight. As everyone was already asleep, he went outside to find something to eat. That night was not an exception. The man once again went out to eat when it was already dark. All the nearby restaurants were closed, so he had to walk for quite a distance to find one. Eventually Lou saw a small noodle restaurant. He quickly went inside without being hesitant. Actually, Lou had been on the street for multiple times, but it was his first time seeing this particular place. The restaurant owner was a bald man with an angular face. He looked a little bit ferocious, yet always had a friendly look on him every time he met his customer. Immediately, a hot bowl of noodle soup was brought to Lou. Starving, Lou quickly finished the dish so he could get back to playing video games. After leaving the noodle restaurant, Lou saw a figure of someone approaching him. Turned out, it was an old lady wearing ragged clothes. She looked pretty mysterious. The mysterious lady was actually a beggar, as she showed her cracked bowl to Lou, asking him for some money. Although Lou was a boring guy and a game addict, he was kind and generous. He took out the money remaining in his pocket and gave it to the old lady without even thinking about it. Then he returned home in a hurry. It looked like the beggar wanted to say something to Lou. But oddly, on the following night, as Lou went to that noodle restaurant again, he saw the old lady sitting in front of the door as if she was waiting for someone. But what's worth noticing was, as Lou was about to get into the restaurant, she quickly got up and held his hand firmly, not letting him go inside. Her bizarre behavior startled Lou. His face turned pale as he thought the old lady might be mentally ill. Lou tried to push her arm, but the lady refused to let go of him. Not only that, what she said to him became more and more serious. Having no other choices, Lou had to talk to her. He couldn't understand why this old lady was acting in such a strange manner despite having just received his money yesterday. Seeing the uncomfortable expression on Lou, the old lady had no other choice but to tell him everything she knew. She muttered to him that the restaurant was actually a place of evil, therefore he'd better leave soon as possible. Of course, Lou didn't buy what the old lady was saying, as what she said actually made him reinforce his belief that she was not a normal person. After ordering a bowl of noodles, this time Lou no longer stared at his phone like he usually did, as he carefully looked around him yet found nothing suspicious. The ones around him ate their dishes with chopsticks. Some even raised their bowls to slurp the soup, just like him. After taking a good look around, he smirked and assumed that the old lady must not be right in the head to think this place was awful, then continued with his dish. There wasn't anything wrong since the moment Lou came in and left the restaurant, as he loved the noodle soup being served there since it suited his taste, and even considered going back to eat again. As Lou was on his way home, he once again encountered the old lady. Her behavior remained unchanged. This time he was definitely annoyed by her. He was under the impression that the old lady was mentally ill, so he yelled at her. "What do you want from me? I truly wish this would be the last time I saw you." But she didn't seem to be bothered by his unpleasant words. From the pocket she took out a small bottle that contained a green liquid and told him to apply it on his eyebrows to see the true appearance of the ones in the noodle restaurant. Having no other choice, Lou had to take the bottle since he didn't want to be bothered again, and then walked away. And the old lady, she was still standing there until she no longer saw his figure. That night, Lou was struggling to sleep as he was thinking about what the lady had said to him, so he got up and brought out the magical bottle. Suddenly he came up with an idea. Why didn't he give it a try to find out whether the lady had lied to him or not? The following night, Lou decided to go to the noodle restaurant again. While everyone was having their dishes, he took out the bottle, poured the liquid on his hand and then applied it on his eyebrows. He took a deep breath, plucked up his courage and then turned around to look at them. It was unknown what Lou had witnessed, yet his face immediately turned pale. Sweat were pouring. His whole body started trembling. The normal people he had previously seen somehow became lifeless corpses with white eyes and pale skin that were covered with scratches. Some only had their eye sockets, There were ulcers on their skins and they hungrily ate the noodle soup, which looked disgusting. Lou quickly looked down to regain his composure, but what appeared before his eyes was even much more terrifying. Just by the look on his face, one could easily tell he had witnessed something truly disgusting. The thing in front of his eyes was a bowl of noodles that was filled with maggots. He couldn't believe that he had eaten them for the past 2 times he visited there. Scared, Lou tossed the bowl aside. He stood up and screamed in horror. The bowl of noodles got overturned, which caused the soup to spill onto the table. Lou's scream and behavior quickly caught the attention of those around him. They stopped eating as if all of them turned around and looked at him with their white eyes. But Lou didn't even bother to care about them. He quickly ran outside, yet accidentally bumped into someone on the way. It was the restaurant owner. He also looked ferocious and scary like the others in the place. He rolled back his eyes, clenched his teeth and asked Lou, "Where are you going, young man? You haven't even paid for the soup." Lou didn't even care about his question, as the only thing appeared on his mind was to escape this scary place. He quickly rushed to the door, yet didn't expect the door to be closed, so Lou couldn't do anything else but to stop despite being trembling scared. As he was about to pay for the soup, the restaurant owner violently grabbed his arms at that moment. He felt like his arms had already been cut off. The restaurant owner didn't insist the young man on paying for his soup, yet he said something strange to him, saying he shouldn't believe what the old lady had told him as she was full of lies. But it didn't matter much to him as who was right or wrong. The only thing he wanted to do was to escape the spooky place as soon as possible. As he finally made it out alive, he once again encountered the old lady. He couldn't understand why she was following him all the time. Days later, the young man still couldn't stop thinking about what had happened to him. Was it the restaurant owner or the old lady that told the truth? Anyway, since that day, Lou no longer dared to go out to eat at night. He broke his bad habits and returned to live like a normal person. Hello there. I'm currently a college student who also used to work as a part-time shipper. Actually, it was my side job working as a shipper. It was pretty tiring and I was weary sometimes, but I earned a pretty good amount of money from it. Whether it was a sunny day or a rainy one, there were always lots of food orders from the customers. Occasionally, I had to learn how to deal with my difficult customers, or how to greet them appropriately so they could be satisfied and give me a 5-star review. I was pleased with the shipping job and I had no intention of looking for another one until one day. Normally the working time for a shipper isn't fixed. There were days when I finished my work at 11 PM, but there were also days that I had to work until 2 AM or even 3 AM. At night, when there were fewer food orders, the shippers would gather at one particular place, smoking, chatting while waiting for the orders. Normally the topic of the talks would revolve around the freaky customers they encountered, or how some restaurant staff had bad attitude towards them. One wouldn't be able to do this job if they didn't have enough stamina and patience. Also, I was chit-chatting with my co-workers when my phone suddenly vibrated. It was a food order from a customer, but the address in it looked kinda strange to me. I asked my 2 co-workers where the place was, but they had no idea. The location was unclear, and it was already at midnight, but since I accidentally accepted the order, I had to say goodbye to my friends and hit the road. But at least I still had Google Maps with me. I didn't feel worried at all as I thought I would easily find the place and quickly return home. Then I drove to the restaurant, bought the food and delivered it to the customer. However, as I was on my way to the address which was displayed on the phone screen, I felt like the distance was way longer than I had expected. The further I drove, the more unlikely I found it that I could find the place. In a moment I realized that I had been outside the city. Feeling annoyed, I wanted to go back, but thinking of the long distance I had driven and the food I had bought, I patiently tried to reach the destination. Behind a row of dense trees appeared a riverbank road and then a forest. But the thing that was worth noticing was I didn't encounter any single person on my way to the place. Right the moment I wanted to quit, a notification popped up saying I was only 100 meters away from the destination, so I kept driving. I stopped by a large gate. It looked like there was a mansion behind the gate. But there was something really strange with this house. From the front door to the garden, there were no lights in sight. The gate wasn't locked, and there was also no doorbell. I made a phone call, but no one answered it, so I plucked up all my courage and went inside, with a food bag in my hand. I had to turn on a flashlight to navigate my way to the house. How enormous this mansion was! The garden was extremely large that took me forever to find the way to the main door. There were even gusts of cold winds that sent chills down my spine, giving me shivers as sweat was dripping down my forehead. Not only that, in the dim light of the flash, I discovered something truly frightening. At the end of the garden appeared a cemetery as it slowly emerged from the darkness. The eerie sound of leaves flying in the air made my skin crawl. I started trembling when I saw the graves. The food bag dropped out of my hand and fell onto the ground. I was dumbfounded for a few seconds and quickly ran out of the place as fast as I could. I got on my bike and drove away in horror. The next day I got sick and was bedridden for 2 days. It was truly the worst time of my life. As I woke up, there were two options that I had to pick one out. One was to continue my shipping job and the other one was to quit and find myself a new job. So after 3 days I decided to get back to work, even though I was still not recovered from the incident that had happened to me that night. I told my two co-workers about the bizarre incident. One of them assumed there was a likelihood that one making the order was living at the cemetery, while the other said I had gotten myself involved in some ghostly stuff. They advised me to buy some offerings and burn them to get rid of the bad luck. Although I didn't hold out much hope that this would work, I still did it anyway as it was for my safety. But things didn't get any better. A few days later, another spooky incident happened to me again. That night, I received a food order and the address was at an apartment building where I had once been to. I easily found the building. It was located in the city and took me 7 minutes to reach the destination. However, the building looked pretty old and there were only a few residents who's been living there. The place to which the food had to be delivered was an apartment located on the 7th floor. The building didn't even have elevators as I had to climb up the stairs, but it was still better than navigating the path on the garden of the cemetery that night. I finally found the apartment. As things were going okay, I somehow had a bad premonition. I knocked on the door with my heart beating uncontrollably. Fortunately, a woman opened the door. As soon as she saw me, she confusedly asked who I was and why I came to her place. Fearing that I had come to the wrong address, I took out my phone and checked if it was any mistake, but found none. I had indeed come to the right place. But the woman insisted on not ordering any food. Even her husband constantly affirmed that I had come to the wrong address. I was angry but chose not to say anything as it would violate the company's principles if I irritated the customers. I suddenly remembered there was always a phone number in an order, so I pressed call. The phone in their house rang out as soon as I called. But soon there was a bewildered expression on them as they said they didn't know where the sound was originating from and even had no idea who had placed the order since there was only 2 of them in the house. A few seconds later, as if the 2 had remembered something, their faces changed color, and for me there was like a burning fire in my heart as I was under the impression the 2 were playing a joke on me. According to the man, the ringtone was similar to that of his father's phone. Moreover, it even came out of his room. I was delighted to hear that. I quickly handed the food back to him as we finally knew who was the one who made the order. "Could you two please take the food to your father and make a payment for me?" But the scared and panicked look on them gave me an impression that things were not as simple as they might seem. As I just finished my sentence, the two turned around and spoke simultaneously. Their father had passed away. I couldn't stay calm, as I thought they were teasing me. With a furious expression on my face, I howled at them and demanded them to take the food back. Seeing me behaving aggressively, the man was agitated. The woman had to rush in and stop us from getting into a fight. Eventually she agreed to pay for the food. After making the payment, the two slammed the door in anger. It was unknown why, but I didn't want to leave immediately, as I just stood in front of the door for a while in bewilderment. Then I accidentally heard part of a conversation from the two freaky customers. Their father had passed away a month ago. His phone had run out of battery and was carefully placed into a drawer in his room, so it would be impossible for someone to use his phone and place an order. After listening to their conversation, I quickly ran away in horror. Right the moment I got out of the building, my phone vibrated. Can you believe it? It was the number I previously called that gave me a 5-star review. Later, I gradually got used to dealing with these bizarre incidents and also the freaky customers, but for my safety, I had avoided delivering food at night. Lily, a white-collar worker, was a beautiful woman who was born into a wealthy family, yet still led a single life. She and the closest made a promise to each other that the two would get married to their fiancés at the age of 30. But that afternoon she received a call from a best friend as she was invited to her wedding. Her closest friend was Nana. As of now, the two had been friends for 20 years. Seeing Lily appeared by the door, Nana cheerfully waved at her. But as soon as the two met each other for a few seconds, Lily immediately upbraided her. She reminded her friend that the two had agreed to marry their fiancés at the age of 30, but Nana had broken her promise. Of course, Lily didn't look too serious when she said that her friend Nana, but it made Nana stammer for a few seconds before she could say anything to invite her to the wedding, which was supposed to be on this Sunday. Seeing the expression on Nana's face, Lily couldn't help but laugh. She told a friend that she would definitely show up, more than anyone. Lily was the one that was most delighted to find out her friend had finally found her Mr. Right. The two ended their convo. Since the moment Lily was in the cafe until she left, Lily constantly reminded herself that she had to be at the wedding at all cost. It looked like she was really excited to be part of this special occasion. Eventually, the wedding ceremony had arrived. Lily took the earliest bus to the house of her friend's fiancé with joyfulness mixed with a bit of jitters. Waiting for Lily at the bus station was a boy who was around 16 or 17 years old. It looked like he was someone from the groom's family. But on the special occasion, the boy was supposed to be happy, yet he somehow looked moody. On the way to the destination, the two didn't say anything to each other. There were times she wanted to break the ice, but the cold look on his face made her speechless. The two remained quiet for another 10 minutes. Feeling unbearable to put up with the oppressive silence, Lily plucked up her courage to ask the young man some questions about the wedding. But he merely responded to her in an abrasive manner. However, the boy's attitude wasn't the only thing that made her feel strange. Contrary to the bustling, noisy atmosphere that was commonly seen at a wedding, the house was deserted. There were no fireworks. Even the palanquin was nowhere to be seen. Lily was accompanied by the boy to the house. At this moment, the groom's parents had been waiting inside. Seeing Lily showing up by the door, the two came out to greet her. They graciously asked her if she had felt tiredness on the way. As they were talking to each other happily, Lily suddenly saw a white flower on the mother's chest. As soon as she asked them about the flower, the two's faces quickly changed color. Usually one would have a white flower on them when they were at a funeral, and a red flower when they were at a wedding, so Lily sensed something odd going around. But instead of replying to a question, the woman spoke in a prudent manner. She didn't want to answer, as she told her there was a long story behind it, and Lily would find out about it later. As soon as the woman finished the sentence, the butler came in. He told everyone to get to the next door in order to get in time for the wedding rituals. The woman asked Lily to go to the next door with her and participate in the wedding ceremony. She followed the three of them to the place. But Lily couldn't help but be suspicious. Instead of being decorated with a prominently red color, the room had a gloomy atmosphere. Moreover, in front of her eyes now was a rectangular object that was wrapped with white towels, looking pretty dreadful. As everyone had gathered at the place, the butler pulled away the towels. Lily's face became darkened as she saw the scene before her eyes. She must have been truly shocked. It turned out the thing which drew her attention was a big coffin laying neatly in the middle of the room. She remembered being invited to the wedding of her closest friend. How it had turned into a funeral. In the coffin were Nana and her fiancé. Nana looked nothing like a dead person, but the man lying next to her, his face had turned pale and colorless. He looked like he had already died. A wedding that was filled with great sorrow. A wedding where the attendances didn't know whether to smile or cry. A wedding so tragic that made anyone present stagger. After a few minutes of bewilderment, Lily finally regained her composure. She couldn't believe her eyes. But right that moment when Lily was in an immense pain, Nana suddenly opened her eyes, which scared Lily stiff. She was terrified, unconsciously stepped backwards. It was until she heard Nana calling her name that she dared to turn around. After a couple of minutes, Lily finally calmed down and suddenly became furious despite being scared just a few moments ago. But the reason of Lily being angry was because she was worried about Nana. Even though she upbraided Nana for scaring her, it was more of an unconditional love she had for Nana that was contained in her words. Having no choice left, Nana had to wait until Lily subsided her anger, then she would dare to explain everything to her. The incident took place just yesterday as Nana and her fiancé were on their way home, after leaving their relative's house. As the two were talking to each other, a truck rushed towards them from behind. It was already too late when the two found out about it. Nana's fiancé pushed her out of the way with great force, while he was still unable to escape the truck running him over. Nana had no idea what was about to happen next. She looked to her husband's direction. The truck now got so close to him, there wasn't any chance for the man to escape, even if he was a god or a man with superpowers. Nana let out a scream as she saw a beloved husband being on the verge of his death. She still had very vivid memories of that tragic moment as her husband reached out to her before he died. His eyes were filled with pure love, regret, and sadness. It was a scene that she would never forget. It was even more tragic as she had to witness the death of her fiancé. The truck ran to him like a mad bull and hit him immediately. Blood splashed everywhere. Lily felt great pain in her heart as she listened to her friend. She didn't expect that her friend would have such a tragic fate. As Nana told her friend everything, she couldn't hold back her tears. Even though her fiancé had died, she still wanted to conduct a wedding ceremony with him and become his wife. That night, the wedding ceremony was conducted in the presence of Lily and both the bride and groom's family members. Nana laid in the coffin. She grabbed her fiancé's arms firmly while fondly gazing at him. Her eyes were filled with pure happiness mixed with a bit of sorrow. She was happy because she had at last become his wife, but it could never fill the aching void in her heart. As the wedding ceremony had come to an end, Lily had to leave even though she didn't want to. Nana accompanying her to the door. Tears kept rolling down her face. But instead of wearing a sad expression on her face, Lily tried to put on a smile and encourage her best friend. Their love had touched Lily's heart. It was such an ultimate sacrifice. A genuine love story between a ghost and a human might sound pretty illogical, but it did happen in real life. And despite it being a bit terrifying to hear, their true love still touched the hearts of many. I grew up in a poor village. Back in the days, most of the roads were in such bad condition that it took us a pretty long time to get to school. For the sake of our education, we attended boarding school as it would be more convenient for us. First day going to school, each of us was handed a set of pillows and blankets to take to our dormitory. As soon as we went to our dorm, we all together cleaned up the room, wiped the dust off the wall and rearranged our stuff. Jack, one of my 3 roommates, discovered a large window in the room. He joyfully opened it to have some morning sunlight in the room and told all of us to come check it out. The window overlooked the school backyard and a dense forest with very tall pines. That night, after we finished our outdoor class meeting time, we quickly got back to our room. Me and another 2 friends of mine decided to play poker for the night, while Leo was sitting at the table studying. He was the most diligent student in our group. It looked like Jack was bitter over losing the game to me, so he asked nerdy Leo to join us. But Leo refused it right away, saying he was busy doing some school assignments in the hope of getting a scholarship. We kept playing the game, yet talked quietly as we didn't want to bother him. We kept playing poker until midnight and then went to our beds. Leo was still sitting at the desk behind the window doing his assignments. As he wanted to take a look outside for getting more ideas, he gently pulled the curtains aside. It was unknown to us what he had witnessed, yet he let out a loud scream which awoke us immediately. The 3 of us got off our beds. We rubbed our eyes, then walked to Leo to check on him. We were wide awake as we saw the things appear in front of our eyes. They were truly beyond imagination. There were blue balls of flame outside the forest. They were igniting and floating in mid-air, looking creepy. While gazing at the blue flames outside the window, Ken asked in amazement, "Guys, what the hell are those things?" Jack replied, "Aren't they spook lights?" The atmosphere inside the room got tense. It became even heavier when Nerdy Leo said it was just some kind of natural phenomena, and we strongly disagreed with him. Ken told us to stop quarreling and suggested us going back to bed as it was already late. The 4 of us went to our beds and slept until late in the next morning. During the lunch break, we gathered around and discussed about the blue flames we had seen last night, then came up with a plan to discover the forest behind our school. I also took this opportunity to tell them about the rumors about those blue flames. People said there were ghosts in the forest. Out of curiosity, the whole group set out to the forest, as we decided to climb over the fence, then make our way to the destination. We successfully made it outside without being recognized, as the teachers and everyone must have been taking their naps. We curiously went deep into the forest as we walked past the tall pines. From inside the forest was way more beautiful than we'd expected. Briefly looking around, we saw nothing abnormal about the place. Suddenly, Nerdy Leo loudly yelled, "Hey guys, come take a look!" He pointed out the white bones scattered and plunged into the ground. None of us had any idea how long these bones had been here. Even more terrifying, near the spot where Leo was standing we quickly found other bones behind the trees. As we were standing in bewilderment, Leo turned away, searching for a spot to urinate. But Ken stopped him from being away from the group as he feared his friend would get lost or encounter something bad on the way. So we decided to follow Leo in case any unexpected incident happened. As Leo was taking a few steps, he tripped and fell into a large hole. Leo screamed in horror. His lower body was stuck inside the hole. He couldn't move at all, as if there was someone underneath him trying to pull him down. We struggled to pull Leo out of the hole as he was scared and in pain. As we finally removed Leo completely from the deep hole, his face was pale. He even had tears on his eyes due to being scared. Leo pointed at his legs, speaking incoherently. Turned out that one of his legs was stuck inside a human skull. How terrifying that there were many dead people buried in this forest. The appearance of the skull also made the atmosphere more intense than ever. Ken almost peed his pants. He said, "What the hell is going on?" Leo panicked as he realized how serious the situation had become. I suggested the group to bring the skull back to the hole and then get back to our room. All of us were scared after the trip. We climbed over the fence and headed to our dorm, then laid on our beds and covered ourselves with blankets. None of us talked to each other as we were still haunted with the things we'd seen at the forest. As we expected, nothing bad would happen to us. Another spooky thing took place. This time, it was way more scary than the things we saw the other night. As we were peacefully sleeping, Ken suddenly got up. He woke up Jack by shaking his shoulder. Jack confusedly looked around and not knowing what was going on. Meanwhile, I was scared to the point when my face had turned purple. I spoke to my friends in a trembling voice and I also heard strange noises. It seemed like we all realized that something creepy was taking place outside the window. Jack plucked up his courage. He got off his bed and walked to the window to check. He pulled the curtains aside and looked out of the window. Jack, suddenly startled, eyes glued to the window as he called us over to see what was going on outside. We didn't see the blue flames like we did the other night. Instead, there were white shadows hovering. They even emitted light which looked so scary to us. We immediately returned to our beds and pretended that we hadn't seen anything. I curled up with my blanket, shaking badly due to great fear. The next days, rumors about the blue balls of flame started spreading. The security guard had brought a dog and chained it at the school backyard to stop us from skipping classes by climbing over the fence. The first night, nothing spooky happened. However, the following nights we were constantly awakened by the dog's bark every time it struck midnight. Ken sat up. He called Jack, who was lying next to him, to go take a look at the window and see if there was anyone entering the school that made the dog bark so loudly. The two pulled the curtains aside and were scared by the scene before their eyes. The blue balls of flames appeared again. They floated around, and that was why the dog had barked so loudly. Its eyes were vicious. The dog growled aggressively while drool was oozing out of his mouth. It looked like the spook lights could feel the dog's aggression towards them. As the dog approached, they slowly moved backwards and disappeared into the forest. We couldn't get back to sleep as the dog was still barking loudly. We were all sleepless that night, while the lights in the teacher's room were on for the whole night. As the sun was about to rise, I heard noises of someone going in and out of the room, but I kept my eyes closed as I was scared of ghosts. The next morning, everybody was freaked out to find out that Nerdy Leo had disappeared. The uniforms he'd prepared for school last night were still placed neatly on the bed. As we left our room, we saw a crowd gathering at the restroom. Standing from afar watching, I suddenly had a bad premonition within me. The three of us looked at each other, wondering if Leo was in trouble. We tried to make our way through the crowd. As we finally got inside the restroom, Ken yelled out that it was Leo. Leo was sleeping in the toilet. He still had his pajamas on. His whole body was cold as he leaned against a wall, unconsciously. But the strangest thing was, Leo's face had become noticeably ill-favored. It was gaunt and there were deep hollows underneath his cheekbones. We carried Leo to the infirmary. All of us believed Leo being in this situation had a lot to do with the balls of flames we saw at the forest last night. Soon as we entered the infirmary, Leo was given a saline drip by the nurse. It was lucky that he just fainted. I heard the boy said that a few minutes later Leo suddenly sat up in a state of panic. We asked him about what happened and were told a story that was beyond our imagination. Last night, as Leo was on his way to the restroom, he had encountered a ghost coming towards him from the end of the corridor. As Leo was being sleepy, he accidentally bumped into the ghost, which fully awoke him. Leo opened his eyes and looked up. He was terrified by the scene before his eyes. It was a horrifying scene that could stay in one's mind forever if they saw it. The face of the man standing in front of him was completely disfigured. His facial skin was cracked. His mouth was wide open without any tooth inside. Panicked, Leo fell backwards and accidentally bumped his head on the wall, then fainted. After the incident, Leo asked for a few days off from school so he could have time to recover. That night, as everyone was sleeping, Jack was again awoken by the dog's loud barks. This time the dog became even more aggressive as he barked louder and louder, which caused Jack to be scared. All three of us went to the window, pulled the curtains aside and turned our gaze at the forest and the school backyard. We were soon freaked out by the reappearance of the blue balls of flames. This time there were more of them coming to our direction. The balls formed the circle surrounding the pitiful dog. A while later it looked like those balls of flames had absorbed the dog's soul as he slowly contracted and fainted. We were heartbroken to witness the scene. Perhaps Leo had dealt with the same situation that day. We were sleepless that night. As the sun came up, the school security guard were freaked out to find the dog died, freezing on the yard, without any apparent reason. We and the other students curiously went to check on the dog. Every one of us was scared and upset by the scene in front of us. The dog had died freezing, all of his limbs held up high. We didn't expect those spooky lights to be so brutal and horrifying. We later found out that the school and its dormitory area were built on a mass grave back in the wartime. No longer after the incident, our school was sealed up and later ended up being dissolved. We moved into another boarding school which was far away from our old one. Our old school had been abandoned ever since, and yet there were still rumors about the ghosts and, of course, the spooky lights. One morning, the industrial zone's technical department suddenly became bustling with activities. It was already 9 AM, but Yun was nowhere to be seen, which aroused the two workers' curiosity. One of them said that Yun had left work early for his girlfriend's birthday yesterday, so there might be a chance that the guy had overslept. As soon as the man finished his sentence, he saw another man rushing and looking worried as he broke bad news to them. His forehead was dripping with sweat. He told everyone that Yun had been rushed to the hospital as he was involved in an accident. Needless to say, everyone instantly rushed to the hospital to check on their friend. As they arrived at the place, they were relieved to find out that Yun was not in a critical condition. They quickly asked the doctors about his situation, as everyone felt worried when they heard Yun had fallen from a high story.
Jan laid on the bed with his face covered with bruises and cuts, looking sorrowful as he couldn't move his body. Two of his friends asked him what had happened. Jan dilated his eyes. He looked scared as he told them about his encounter with a ghost. Yesterday, the man was invited to a birthday party. As he met the woman whom he once loved and found out that she had been married, Jan had drunk a bit too much. Feeling wasted, the man said goodbye to his friends and then walked back home. Jan staggered all the way home. He didn't even know if he was taking the right direction. As the man walked for a while, he stopped by a construction site and found out that the road ahead was under repair due to its bad condition. But Jan kept walking as he was too drunk. He bumped into a sign and fell next to a hole. Jan immediately panicked. He was very close to falling down the hole. He crawled near to it and looked down. Its depth scared him instantly. There were rocks and steel at the bottom of the hole. Despite being scared, Jan felt blessed as he had just escaped death. He angrily got up and released all his pent-up emotions to the sign as he kicked it down the hole. As it reached the bottom, the man laughed cynically as he was delighted to remove the thing out of his sight. All of a sudden, Jan wanted to vomit. The guy seemingly had drunken too much. He went to a corner and threw up. As the man finished his business, he felt so comfortable. However, right that moment, Jan heard a motorcycle sound from behind him. A couple was seen driving to the construction site at a high speed. Jan turned around in panic as he realized the two was heading to the large hole. But as soon as the man could react to it, a loud noise was heard. Sensing something awful had happened, Jan approached the spot, and the scene before his eyes immediately terrified him. A dreadful look appeared on his face. Sweat rolled down his cheeks as he grinded his teeth, knowing he had made a fatal mistake. The couple had fallen down the hole. Their bodies laid unmoving in a pool of blood. Their bike had been badly damaged. The two had died at the scene, and what was seen at the spot was extremely terrifying. Jan quickly ran away after witnessing the incident. Even though it wasn't his sole purpose, his actions had directly caused the two to die tragically. As he finally made his way back to the apartment building, he gently opened the door, carefully not to wake anyone, while praying that nothing bad would happen to him. He got on his bed feeling fearful, trembling, pleading for mercy. He even reassured himself that nothing bad would happen as it wasn't entirely his fault. The next morning, while his friends had left for work early, Jan was still half awake. He tried to sleep a bit longer and hoped what happened last night was just a bad dream of his. However, a few moments later he heard something growling behind him, and the room was taken over by an eerie atmosphere that made his skin crawl. As the man looked up, he instantly got startled by the horrifying scene of the couple dying in the hole last night. They were covered with blood as they screamed loudly and threatened to kill him. Jan shouted loudly. He covered himself with his blanket. It was indeed them. They were standing next to his bed, looking creepy. In a blink of an eye, the man opened his mouth widely as he wanted to eat Jan alive. Jan instantly jumped off his bed. He dodged the sharp nails of the dead couple and ran away in fear. But it was impossible for him to do it as the two were standing next to the main door. So he made his way to the balcony as it was the only way for him to escape. Jan looked down. His heart beat erratically as he was currently at the 7th story of the building. It would be nothing but suicide to jump down from this height. He would definitely end up dying the same way like the dead couple. But it wasn't the only thing that scared him. Now as the ghost approached him, looking ferociously. Their eyes were filled with anger. The male ghost extended his arm to Jan, revealing the sharp fingernails while grinding its teeth as it rushed to him. Jan recoiled in horror. As he found himself to be in a tight corner, he pleaded for mercy as there was no way else for him to run. But the male ghost didn't hesitate for a bit. It pushed Jan to fall off the balcony as an act of revenge for what he had done the night before. The push caused Jan to lose his balance and he fell over the balcony. Jan was in extreme fear. He raised his arm in despair. From the balcony the ghost was staring at him and laughing demonically. However, it was fortunate of Jan to land on a large branch, which greatly reduced the damage of the fall. Thanks to the tree branch, the man still survived after the fall. Jan laid unmoving on the ground, his whole body paralyzed as he unconsciously gazed up. There was no one at the balcony. After laying on the floor for about an hour, he was found by a security guard and quickly rushed to a hospital. As Jan regretfully told the story to his friends, he told them not to be worried much about him. The two friends were astonished to find out about the tragic incident. They quickly went to the construction site and noticed that the hole was being sealed by a road worker. The worker confirmed there was a couple who unfortunately fell down the hole last night, but they survived and had been put under special treatment. The two men were surprised. They then went to the hospital to verify what the road worker had told them. As they arrived at the place, a nurse told them there was indeed a couple being taken to the hospital last night. The woman was slightly injured, but the man was in critical condition. However, he had overcome it and was slowly getting better. The two men then went to the couple's cots. They were still alive, which confused them, as Jan had previously confirmed that the couple didn't make it. The vengeful story which they had been told by Jan no longer made sense now. They started doubting if it was just a nightmare of his. There must be a strong likelihood that Jan had hallucinated and felt disgusted by his sins, an effect that was caused by the excess of alcohol he took in that night. As he was haunted by the scene at the construction site, he had jumped off the balcony and fell on the ground. This scary story revolves around Mr. Hero and Miss Cho's family. Due to bankruptcy, they had to move back to their hometown in order to make a living. The family moved in their late uncle's house, which had been left abandoned for years. It was a spring morning with fresh air when they started a new life at their new home. The house had been deserted for a long time. However, Hero and Cho felt blessed as they still had a place to stay. It wasn't an easy task to find a house this good without having to pay any cent, especially in these times of crisis. This was truly a blessing for Hero and his family. No sooner had Cho stepped into the house than she venerated her late uncle's altar. She had left her hometown for a long time. As a result, she had a pang of guilt on her return. Cho and her family were just supposed to stay at this place for a short time, and would leave as soon as they could afford a new house. The couple had two children, the older one named Dosu and the little one named Diane. That day, as the two were taking a shower, they suddenly heard their dad screaming. The younger child instantly got out of his bathtub and went to see his father. As Dosu turned off the faucet, then ran behind him. Diane saw his dad pouring with sweat, looking to the direction of the bed while being terrified. The child then turned his gaze at the bed and instantly got scared. His face turned pale. His eyes were wide open as he gasped in fear. It turned out that there was a snake that looked really scary on the bed. As Dosu arrived later, he brought himself a shovel and immediately rushed to the snake as soon as he saw it. The boy let out a scream as he lifted the shovel, then hit the snake on its head. Blood was spilled and the snake was killed right after that. Opposite to the exciting look on Dosu's face, Mrs. Chow felt extremely worried about her son's actions as she believed the presence of the snake was a sign of bad luck. Hero used a stick to carry the dead snake outside. As everything seemed to have ended, what turned out next was completely out of their expectation. One afternoon, while the other two brothers were playing outside, it was unknown what Diane had witnessed, yet he dripped with sweat and trembled uncontrollably. The boy was in utter bewilderment for a few seconds. He pointed to something and muttered, "Snake! Snake!" Dosu was startled by what he heard. As he turned around, he saw a snake stretching its jaws, revealing its sharp teeth, which caused him to panic. Dosu reached to the shovel and hit the snake multiple times. As the snake was killed, he again used the shovel to brutally split it into small pieces. Right that moment, Miss Cho had just returned from the market. As Diane told her about the incident, her face became dark. She panicked. She wondered how could it be so coincidental to have so many snakes going into her house. Diane showed his mom the spot where his brother Dosu killed the snake. To Diane's amazement, the snake had mysteriously disappeared. The blood was still there, but it was no longer to be seen. How could it be possible considering the fact that the snake had been chopped to pieces? Feeling shocked, Diane together with his mom and Dosu went to the spot where the snake had been killed. Diane was instantly scared to find out that the snake had gone. He stammered as cold sweat ran down his face. Sensing something terrible, the mother reassured her children and took them back to their rooms, then went to the altar room. Dosu had turned 15 this year. He was mature enough to have questions about his mom's bizarre behavior. He wondered why his mom said the snakes had something to do with her late uncle. Dosu told Diane to go to the next room to see what their mom was doing. Diane looked inside the altar room through a window and quickly felt strange. His mother was burning incense sticks. She looked anxious. Then the woman muttered something under her breath as she pleaded for forgiveness for her 2 children. But what happened next instantly amazed her. The incense stick had been broken in half without being physically affected. This must be a sign that indicated the spirits had been upset. Chow totally panicked to see the incense being broken in half. She bowed to the altar of her 2 late uncles, but it looked like they weren't approving of her pleading for forgiveness. The next morning a tragedy happened to the family. As it was still early in the morning, Diane unexpectedly let out a piercing scream. He rushed out of his room and went to his parents, telling them that his brother was acting strangely. The couple, terrified as they ran to check on their son and saw Dosu writhing painfully on his bed. Miss Cho rushed to her son at that moment. Dosu was feeling an immense pain throughout his whole body. Out of nowhere appeared deep cuts on both Dosu's arms and legs. There was even blood oozing out of the wounds. The couple hurriedly took Dosu to the nearest clinic. But even the doctors were frowning in confusion as they had never encountered a case of such a strange disease. Not only that, the cuts made Dosu wrestle with unbearable pain. It lasted longer than expected and the wounds had no sign of healing. Thinking the situation his child got in had something to do with evils, Hiro went to ask his mom for help. Hiro's mom then asked a shaman in the village to come to her house. A while later the shaman had finally showed up despite being a bit late. Hiro's mom quickly told the shaman to get inside and started telling him about her grandson's situation. The shaman said the incident needed to be handled soon as its consequences would be dangerous. He also worried that Dosu wouldn't be able to put up with the pain for longer than 3 days. Hiro's mom said a grandchild had killed 2 snakes as one of them had disappeared on that day. So she believed the snake had returned and taken revenge on her grandson. Having comprehended the whole story, the shaman told them to get him a gas stove as he needed to make amulets. Hiro's mom said she would have it ready for him immediately. The shaman said the snakes were actually incarnations of the spirits in the house, and those who dared to kill them would definitely be punished. As the gas stove was on, the shaman took a bag of yellow papers and then burned them. Strangely, there was this envelope which didn't get burned even just a bit. A few minutes later, the shaman put the envelope inside 2 voodoo dolls. According to the shaman, the 2 snakes that had been killed were actually Mrs. Cho's late uncle and his wife, and Dosu had been punished for killing them. Now the shaman said he needed to make 2 voodoo dolls for the spirits to get inside, thus forgiving Dosu. Hiro and his mom couldn't hide the terror on their faces. They didn't expect Dosu would do such an awful thing. As the dolls and the amulets had been prepared, the shaman threw them in the fire to cast a spell. He then told Hiro to place the amulet bag onto the altar, and Dosu would instantly recover from his illness. What the shaman said turned out to be true, as 2 days later, Dosu was totally free from sickness and became healthy again. This story serves as a message to tell all of us not to kill sacred animals like snakes or butterflies, and those who dare to kill them would be punished severely.
This story revolves around the terrifying incidents that took place at a poor village which was located somewhere in the mountainous area of China. The protagonist of the story is a guy named Fong. He was a good-looking young man with gentle, likable character and was always hard-working. His daily job was to go mushroom picking in the mountains and then traded the mushrooms at the market. One day, as usual, Fong went to the forest on his own. The continuous rainfall that took place recently had allowed lots of mushrooms to grow. Fong picked the mushrooms carefully, checked them one by one, and then put them in the bamboo basket on his back. Then he made his way deep into the forest. As he was walking, he suddenly smelled a heavy scent. It gently drifted through the forest breeze. Fong was quickly dazzled by the lovely scent. He looked around and decided to follow his nose. The fresh scent led him to go further into the forest. Fong was amazed to find out that the source of this beautiful scent was actually from a wild flower. But this one was different, as it was the first time in his life seeing such a strange-looking flower. It looked similar to a lotus bud, with small petals that unfolded in circles, surrounding the white bud. The flower looked pretty similar to the jasmine since it had thin petals. The pistils in the middle still had nectar on them. The heavy scent released from the flower and the aura surrounding it immediately caught the man's attention. But what amazed him the most was there was only one special flower like this one growing up in the middle of this deserted forest. Out of curiosity, Fong approached the flower. The flower suddenly gave off strong unpleasant smell that made him cover his nose and step backwards. Later he found out there were large and long roots tightly tying the small flower, as if they were absorbing all the nutrients of the small plant. As he walked along the roots, he saw a bush nearby. He approached it and found out there was something mysterious hiding behind the grooves. Curiously, he grabbed the roots and pulled them out strongly, but there was something heavy affecting them and hence prevented him from doing it. Then the man came up with an idea. He followed the roots to see where they would lead him to. The amazement within him piled up as he realized the thing in front of him was not something in the underground. Actually, it was a pumpkin that had already been withered. From the top of the vegetable appeared a long root. It was also the one that made him curious the whole time. Fong couldn't hide the disappointment mixed with a bit of surprise on his face. He kept staring at the pumpkin, and wondered to himself how there could be a pumpkin that grew in such a strange way, and how bizarre it seemed to him. Fong walked close to the pumpkin. He realized it had the same size of a watermelon, but there were some dark spots on it that looked like they had been rotten. He carefully checked the pumpkin, then decided to take it home and sell it at the market later, as he assumed he could sell the vegetable at a good price. Or maybe he should show it to the villagers and to find out what type of pumpkin this one was. It wasn't an everyday thing to encounter with a pumpkin like this, hence the man was curious to see what it looked like inside. He put the pumpkin in his basket and then went down the mountain. On his way he was thinking that he would do this to the pumpkin he just found. He kept thinking about it up until he left the dense forest and returned to his village. Fong headed to the market. When he showed the pumpkin to the villagers, they quickly gathered round it to take a look of it. They asked where he had found it.
Wow.
Some was amazed to learn there was a pumpkin this big growing in the forest. They looked at it in amazement. A young man among the crowd suggested to Fong to put it up for auction, but another one told Fong to be careful with the pumpkin. The forest was considered a sacred place, and there was no chance for a pumpkin like this to grow in it. One villager suggested cutting the pumpkin in half to see what was inside it. Fong agreed with the idea. He held a knife in his hands and was about to cut it in the presence of the villagers, Suddenly a male voice came out from behind, saying,
"Stop it! Do not cut the pumpkin!"
The villagers turned around. It was an old man standing at the end of the queue. Feng was surprised to the man's remark. He asked, "Why not cut the pumpkin?" The old man spoke in a sacred manner.
"This spooky pumpkin has been cursed."
The villagers talked to each other in a tumult of confusion. What if the old man was speaking the truth? Then Feng had brought bad luck to the villagers. Feng was extremely annoyed by what the old man had told him. He snapped at the man, saying what he just said was nonsense. The old man remained calm to Feng's anger. He looked at him and said that the pumpkin was not that normal and harmless as it might seem. Everybody was amazed to hear it. They asked how they could know the pumpkin was not normal. The old man recollected everything. He told the villagers a story that had happened to him years ago. In the old days, when the war broke out, the Japanese fascists had brutally killed off people in the forest. They tied up people who opposed them with a long rope and made them line up horizontally in front of the gun barrels. Then the commander would order the soldiers to shoot at them. After the noises of gunshots, blood was seen spilling everywhere. The scene was horrific and terrifying. The souls of those who tragically died at the forest were still there. They turned into blue balls of flame, wandering around the forest, therefore making the atmosphere at the place always gloomy and cold. The souls were sent to a wildflower since they were absorbed into it. The flower was very different from others. It was spooky and ghostly. As time passed by, from the spot of the wildflower grew a pumpkin, and it was the one that Feng brought home today. Actually, they were elsewhere in the forest that had white flowers like it. The villagers were scared as they listened to the old man. Some told Feng not to cut the pumpkin as they believed what he said was true. But the young men in the village didn't think that way. They assumed it was just a made-up story of the old man to scare villagers. The contradictory ideas from two sides quickly caused fierce quarrels to break out. The atmosphere started becoming tense and noisy, which made Feng extremely annoyed. At that moment, the group of young teenagers was behind Feng. They challenged him to cut the pumpkin open. The old man tried to talk him out of doing it. Then he turned around and walked away, yet not forgetting to say something before leaving.
"One day you will regret for what you have done today."
The old man's words kept echoing on his mind. He stayed silent and felt bewildered. However, out of curiosity, he decided to cut the pumpkin open. As he reached to a sharp knife, he looked at the pumpkin placed on the wooden cutting board. Without hesitation, the man cut the pumpkin with a great force. It immediately split in half, and a terrifying scene happened before the villagers' eyes. Blood inside the pumpkin splashed everywhere following the cut. The villagers were scared to death to see the scene. There was nothing but blood inside the pumpkin. Blood was spilling everywhere on Feng's body. Some couldn't even stand the fishy smell and had to cover their noses. The villagers blamed everything on Feng. They accused him of bringing ghosts to the village, and he had to be held responsible for it. The villagers left after the incident. They left him standing there in bewilderment. That morning, the villagers had been scared out of their wits. They locked the doors as soon as they got home, not daring to go out due to the fear for encountering ghosts. And the horror had happened. That night, Feng couldn't sleep as he felt a burning pain all over his body. Despite not being scratched by anyone, pieces of his skin was peeled off and fell onto the floor. The smell of blood was all over his body. Feng felt itchy and extremely painful. It felt like there was some kind of invisible force slowly torn apart his layers of skin. In just a blink of an eye, the skin on the lower half of his face had been removed. Under the dim light, Feng got off his bed and took heavy steps. Feng was so scared and ashamed of his look. He covered up his face and went to the old man's house asking for his help. He assumed the old man must know something about the white flower and the pumpkin. and know how to cure this obscure disease. If the villagers found out about Fong having this rare disease, they would definitely force him to leave the village, and this worried him a lot. Fong plucked up his courage. He knocked on the door. A while later, someone finally came out to open the door. The old man gazed at Fong and asked, "What's happened?" Fong looked at the old man with his soulful eyes, then slowly pulled down the cover on his face, revealing the open sores. He then said it was the pumpkin that caused him to be like that. Seeing the ulcers on his face, the old man couldn't help but be shocked. He stood open-mouthed as he found out it was a pumpkin that caused this. The old man then told Fong to come inside his house. Fong was extremely frightened. He pleaded the old man for help. The old man gazed at Fong in disappointment as he had tried to warn him before, yet he didn't listen to him. He told Fong, "Crush the pumpkin into powder, then apply it onto the ulcers. They will heal in 2 hours. Fong was so happy to know that he could be saved at last, but he soon realized that he had thrown the pumpkin into the river this afternoon. The old man grabbed his flashlight, then told Fong to follow him to the forest for the antidote. He knew where to find a pumpkin that was similar to the one Fong had found. The two set out to the forest at midnight. Fong asked the old man, "How could you know so much about that pumpkin?" The man told him a story related to the curse of the pumpkin that had happened to him before. When he was young, Jan, his younger brother, had dealt with the same situation. The younger brother was just like Fong. He accidentally found a pumpkin in the forest, and then happily brought it home and showed it to the villagers. They gathered around him, amazed at the bizarre pumpkin. Jan happily brought it home as a gift for his wife. That night he and his wife had small discussion over what to do with the pumpkin. The married couple and their son gathered around the pumpkin. They decided to bring it to the market and sell it for some money. Suddenly there were knocks outside. The whole family was amazed that it was already late. They didn't expect to have a guest coming that late. A middle-aged man, formally dressed with a briefcase in his hands, came inside. The man introduced his name in a hoarse voice, but there was something unfriendly of him that made the whole family feel wary. The man said he came from the south and offered to buy the pumpkin. Seeing Jan being hesitant about his offer, the man continued by saying that the pumpkin was actually a spiritual one and he was willing to buy it at any price. Jan was thinking for a while. He wondered how the man knew about the pumpkin. The man said it could cure some incurable diseases and was extremely rare. The villagers had told him about the pumpkin and told him to go to Jan's house. Jan asked the man how much money he could pay for the pumpkin. The man raised his 5 fingers and offered to buy the plant at a high price, one that was beyond Jan's imagination. 500,000 won. Jan was shocked. It was a tremendous amount of money to him. The man convinced Jan to sell the pumpkin to him. He said the pumpkin could have a low value to Jan, but to him it was completely the opposite. A scenario of enormous wealth appeared right before the young man's eyes. The man continued by saying that he would help Jan become the richest man in the village if he agreed to sell the pumpkin to him. But Jan had to take him to the forest and show where the pumpkins like this one were. Of course, Jan would earn a high commission for taking the man to the place. Jan didn't hesitate to take the offer. Things happened so smooth that he didn't know what to do except gladly accepting it. But the man wanted to go to the forest right at that moment, which amazed the whole family, as it wasn't a good idea to go to the forest in the middle of the night. Jan refused to take him to the forest as he felt uneasy about leaving his wife and son at home this late. So he suggested to wait until the sun came up and then they would set off. But the man said he couldn't wait. He even offered to raise the price for the pumpkin if Jan agreed to take him to the forest immediately. Now Jan couldn't miss this once-of-a-lifetime opportunity. He agreed with the man's offer and said goodbye to his wife and son. Before leaving for the forest, he reminded them to lock the door and told them that he would be back soon. Then Jan and the man set off their journey. With a worrying expression on her face, the wife told Jan to be careful, as it could be dangerous to go to the forest this late. Jan reassured his wife, saying that he would be back home soon. The The woman held her child in her arms and gazed at her husband with anxious eyes. She looked insecure as she sensed something mysterious about the man. The two watched Jan and the strange man walking their way to the forest, until their figure faded into darkness. That night, as the woman had lulled the child to sleep, she was still thinking about her husband. The sun had come up, but Jan hadn't returned. Sensing something bad had happened, she told the villagers about the incident and asked them to help her find Jan. The villagers agreed to go to the forest to look for Jan and the mysterious man, as they also believed there was something dangerous and untrustworthy about the man. So they went to the forest. As they had arrived, they split into smaller groups and went to different directions searching for Jan. The villagers called out his name. Their voices resounded throughout the forest, but there was no answer from him. It was until noon, when everyone had been tired. A group of young men had witnessed a shockingly terrifying scene. Everyone was freaked out to see the scene before their eyes, as it was so brutal and dreadful. As Jan's wife rushed to the scene, she couldn't hold back her tears, bursted out crying loudly. The mysterious man had killed Jan. His body leaned against a tree, mouth opened in fear while the eyes were wide open. The wife rushed to her dead husband, hugged him while crying out in extreme pain. A gloomy atmosphere pervaded the whole forest. The villagers were determined to find the mysterious man to take revenge on him. There was a high chance that he was still in the forest. The villagers separated in smaller groups searching for the man. The intense and furious look was visible on their faces. One villager found a clue about the man. He kept searching. As the man walked for a bit longer, he screamed out loud and fell to the ground as if he had witnessed something truly scary. The other villagers rushed to see what happened. The young man pointed to the place where he had just seen the horrors. Everybody was shocked to see the scene before their eyes. The mysterious man had died. He laid next to the tree roots, mouth wide open just like Jan. However, he was still tightly holding the pumpkin that Jan had showed to the villagers. The expression on his face was bizarre yet horrifying. By the look of his face, one could easily tell the man had witnessed something truly scary, while he was keeping the pumpkin with him. Everyone was freaked out. In just a morning, the villagers had found 2 dead bodies in the forest. There was a strong likelihood that the man was killed by the ghosts in the forest. The villagers believed it was a fitting punishment for the man, as he had previously killed Jan in such a brutal manner. As the old man finishing telling his story, Fong asked him, "So what happens after that? Who was the mysterious man?" The old man calmly replied, "He was a grave robber from the south who specialized in trading spooky things." Fong expressed his amazement. "How did you know so well about the pumpkin?" The old man then confessed that he was told about its magical uses by his master, but he never truly believed it. These spooky pumpkins could absorb the souls of dead people. Although they could cure many incurable diseases, they were extremely dangerous. The two then reached the end of the forest. At this moment, Fong realized that they had arrived at the spot where he found out about the pumpkin and the white flower. Both Fong and the old man saw the long roots laying on the ground. The old man reached to his pocket and pulled out a knife. He made a cut to one of the roots. From the cut, a white sap oozed out. The old man told Fong to apply the white sap on his face and the ulcers. The old man gazed at the tree roots. He looked worriedly. He believed if the tree roots were still developing, there would be other pumpkins growing in the forest. Then the man suddenly recalled having a book from his master that illustrated a way of removing these tree roots. He didn't expect that one day he would have to use it. The next morning, Fong went to the old man's house. The two carried bamboo baskets that were loaded with yellow powder, which was made by the old man himself. Then they set out to the forest again. As they arrived at the spot, the old man sprinkled the powder on the tree roots. Oddly, as the powder was sprinkled on them, the roots quickly shrunk and became withered. Fong also followed him to do the same. The tree roots altogether withered and died. The old man then took out an incense burner, then lit 3 incense sticks. He made an altar to honor the souls wandering in his forest, and also free them. The atmosphere in the forest suddenly became warmer and fresher. The two went down the mountain after finishing their work. In the forest, the tree roots once again were reborn. They wrapped around the big trunks and sprouted a white flower. This is a scary story that I was told by my father. It happened to him when he was young. That day, my father, together with his other colleague, went to see a mutual friend of theirs. The three of them had drunken excessively. As it struck midnight, my father said his farewell to the other two men. One of them accompanied my dad to the gate and told him to be careful along the way. As my dad was walking on the familiar street, he realized it looked a bit strange and more unusual than it had normally been. He took a deep breath, then went into the pitch darkness. The gusts of wind gave my father a comfortable feeling as he made his way back home. A while later, my father went to a three-way junction. He looked confused at the roads ahead of him, then decided to take a shortcut. As he kept walking, he suddenly realized that in order to get home, he had to get through a forest. As he made his way deeper into the forest, he stepped onto the dead leaves on the ground, which created a sound that echoed throughout the whole place. My dad kept walking and walking, without caring much about what was going on around him. However, there was something strange here. Why was there too much fog in the forest? At that time, the wind was blowing lightly and the atmosphere was eerily scary. My dad finally sobered for a moment. He took a look around and found out that he was in the middle of a dense forest. There was no light at all. Suddenly, he heard a noise. My dad went to the direction of the noise as he slowly walked there to see what was going on. A group of men was seen gathering, singing and dancing cheerfully as they sat in a circle. Out of curiosity, my father walked to the group and howled, "Hey, I want to join you guys." My dad had a passion for singing and dancing as he never missed out a chance to participate in these kind of activities. That was the reason why he asked him to let him join in, with an excited look on his face. The drunkenness made him even more enthusiastic. He danced with a group of strangers all night and didn't even bother to go home. When it was nearly morning, my father had fully sobered. He instantly realized there was something not right taking place here. The scene before his eyes had changed. My dad had seen the group of men dancing around him suddenly becoming disfigured, which made them all look like monsters. As my dad rubbed his eyes constantly, he became even more terrified to see the things appearing in front of him. The shape of the people here became even more disfigured. Their faces looked lifeless. They walked very slowly, as if they were floating off the ground. They were also seen stammering, but the sound coming out of their mouths was haunting. All of a sudden, a guy had his head twisted around, which looked incredibly creepy. Their dance moves had also changed as they were way more creepy. My dad was completely bewildered. He tried to escape, but the ghosts didn't let him leave as they surrounded him in a circle. My dad screamed out in fear. He pushed his way through the crowd and ran away, leaving the ghosts behind, trying to grab him. As it was getting dark, my dad slowly realized that he had been lost. What was even more terrifying, the tall mighty trees unexpectedly got twisted. They didn't even look realistic, which scared the hell out of him. The sudden thoughts popped into my dad's mind, making him feel dizzy. A total new world had appeared before his very eyes, one that was scary and spooky. Then my father caught himself standing in the middle of a maze of roads. He panicked. Not knowing which road to take, he thought to himself that he was being tricked by the ghosts in this forest. Sweat poured down his face as he tried to step forward, but his steps unknowingly became heavy as he walked sluggishly, as if he had been exhausted. The atmosphere in the forest also became scorching hot. The high temperature worn him out as his face turned pale and dripped with sweat. A few moments later, he felt numb throughout his whole body. All of a sudden, my father felt giddily, as if he had no strength left in his body.
He slowly closed his eyes and confusedly walked forward. The tree leaves fluttering in the breeze, the things appearing before his eyes became dark and blurry in the night fog. My dad was scared. He tried to regain his consciousness while finding a way to get out of the spooky forest. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't even get up on his own. Things started getting more and more blurry. My dad was no longer aware of anything around him as he slowly fainted. The next morning, my dad was awoken by the sunlight shining down the forest. He slowly opened his eyes and saw two men staring at him. With a worried expression on their faces, the men asked if my dad was okay and asked how he ended up in this forest. A while later, my father had fully regained his consciousness. There were scratches all over his body. He couldn't even lay on his side as he faced his face onto the ground due to fatigue. As the smell of alcohol emanated from my father, the two men could guess that he had got lost on the way home due to drunkenness. They lifted him up and offered to take him home. As they made their way out of the place, my dad turned around and gazed at the forest. He recalled what had happened to him while the questions on his mind still remained unanswered. Later, my father found out that there was this one particularly scary flower that was called by the name ghostly grass. In this forest, the flower could cause hallucinations to those who got exposed to it. At night, it emitted a smell causing the one who breathed it in to hallucinate. The woodcutters also saw things being deformed as they went to the forest at night. After the incident, neither did my dad dare to get wasted nor go to the forest late at night. It still haunted him to this day, as he still forbids me to go to the forest. This is a scary story about ghosts, punishments, and a young man named Zing who was the one who had to suffer them all. Back when Zing was a child, one day there was a clairvoyant coming to his house. He looked at Zing's face and said that the guy would be a glutton who was very greedy when he grew up and had to live off his parents. The clairvoyant then said he could change Zing's facial features. But Zing's mother scolded him badly as she was offended by him saying bad things about her son's looks. She then told him to get out of her house as she always had faith in Zing that he would become successful in life. However, Zing had become a sponger at an early age, as anywhere he saw people eating a good meal he'd always join them or ask them to have a part of it. The man didn't change his bad habits even when he had fully grown up, day by day going to everyone's houses asking for food and not bothering to look for a job. His relatives were really annoyed, but they didn't know how to express their dissatisfaction with him. One day Zing asked his mom for some money as he wanted to attend a friend's wedding. As the mom put the money in an envelope, Zing opened it and found it was a bit too much for a wedding gift. He purposely took out a portion of it for himself. The atmosphere at the wedding was bustling with people talking excitedly. Only Zing was isolated as no one liked to sit near him, which slowly made him feel out of place. Lonely, drinking the liquor, Zing suddenly had a feeling of embarrassment. He left the party but no one seemingly cared about him. On his way home, Zing saw a strange, good-looking young man slowly approaching him. The man asked, "Hey, are you one of the villagers?" Zing slightly nodded his head. The man then warned him to be careful walking on this path at night and avoided looking at anything out of the ordinary if he didn't want to be in trouble. But Zing didn't take what the man said seriously. He kept staggering drunkenly but soon got startled by something before his eyes. There was a group of people sitting, doing something fishy, which aroused his curiosity. Zing was in utter bewilderment. It was already late at night. What were those people doing here? As the question still remained unanswered, the man felt uneasy as he realized he had encountered a series of bizarre things lately.
The group appeared to be eating something on the way. Strangely, they picked up dirty stuff on the ground and ate them hungrily. There was an old lady to be seen yelling at them. But Zing wasn't bothered about it, as he had to look for a place to urinate. After the man finished his business, all of a sudden everything around him disappeared. Even the tree where he had just finished taking a pee were no longer to be seen. Zing rubbed his eyes. He instantly felt scared. Was everything appearing in front of him a hallucination? Zing realized he was standing in the middle of a graveyard. The graves were placed haphazardly, and the atmosphere was eerily scary. He felt something wet underneath his feet. As he looked down, he saw a mess of offerings, fruits and wine being spilled everywhere. It was at this moment he terrifiedly found out that he just pissed on a grave. As Zing was still in horror, from behind him a group of people unexpectedly rushed to him. It was the group which he'd previously encountered on the path. They looked extremely pale. Their skins were pale and their eyes were white. They asked Zing how he dared to urinate on their place. All of a sudden, a ghost that looked like an old lady rushed to Zing, intending to rip his neck off. Feeling extremely horrified, Zing fainted, foaming at the mouth as he laid unmoving on the ground. A while later, Zing finally regained his consciousness. He woke up and realized that the group of strangers had disappeared. But Zing was no longer calm enough to keep thinking about what had happened. He immediately got up and made his way home as fast as he could. As soon as Zing made it home, his stomach growled with hunger. He rushed to the kitchen, looking for food as he looked like a lifeless person. His parents heard the noises quickly, got up and went to check. Seeing his son coming home late, yet messing things up in the kitchen, the father angrily yelled, "What the hell are you doing? Were the food at the wedding not enough for you?" Zing remained quiet. He slowly took a knife and headed to the backyard without saying a word to his father. He made his way to the chicken coop and brutally cut off the head of the biggest rooster. The mother was terrified to see the action of her son. She had no idea why he cut the chicken in half, which shocked her terribly. The father then approached his son. He put his hands on his shoulders and asked him why he was behaving like that. Zing slowly turned around. His eyes turned pure white as if he was being possessed, then told his father that he was starving. Sensing something bizarre with his son, the man quickly reassured him that they would get the food ready for him. He then told his wife that Zing had been possessed, which was the reason why he acted so bizarrely. He told her to keep making the food to avoid worsening the problem. He quickly went to see a shaman. It was already 3 in the morning. The paths were empty. He tried to go as fast as possible due to his great worry about Zing. When the shaman finally arrived at the house, Zing had just finished his chicken meal. Seeing the shaman, Zing spoke in a strange voice, saying he needed to eat more to satisfy his hunger. Zing ate frantically. He rolled his eyes back into his head, looking as if he'd lost control of himself. He kept eating until he was full, then leaned back in his chair, feeling like the stomach was about to explode. All of a sudden, Zing's body convulsed constantly as he foamed at the mouth. The shaman said he had been possessed and told his parents to tie him up with a rope in case something bad happened. She stuck a yellow amulet paper onto Zing's forehead, which had the power to remove the evil from his body. Zing screamed out in pain. As he was going through the spiritual process, suddenly there was a voice of an old lady. She said the ghosts were very hungry as no one honored them and offered them food. The lady then told a story of hers, saying she was a miser when she was still alive. Even when she was bedridden, she still didn't want to go to the hospital as it would save her some money. The lady told her son to tie her to her bed for 7 days, then ended up dying due to starvation. Before she died, she told her son to bury her at the abandoned graveyard outside the village. The request was immediately turned down by her daughter-in-law, but her son did it anyway as it was her last wish. After her death, her brother was the only one that still remembered her as she went to clean a grave and offer food once in a while. The lady was furious that Zing had urinated on the food offerings. As a result, she had to possess him to find food to eat. The female shaman asked the ghost lady to forgive Zing and left his body, as his family promised to make offerings of food to her regularly. As everything had been settled, Zing's father thanked the shaman and saw her off. Before leaving, the shaman told him to take Zing to a hospital for checkup as the man had eaten many harmful foods. As Zing was taken to the hospital, the doctor was amazed to find out Zing had eaten lots of uncooked food, even swallowed chicken bones, and his stomach was bigger than that of a normal person.